Jin Kim stood in the crowded marketplace of Luna City, his eyes fixed on the strangest coffee machine he had ever seen. The old brass and copper device sat on a dusty shelf between broken robot parts and outdated computer screens. The price tag made him wince, but after 3 months of drinking the bland, automated coffee on the KSS Sejong, he was ready to spend his savings. "That's a real Earth antique," the shop owner said, watching Jin's interested face. "Almost 200 years old. Still works perfectly." The old man picked up the machine and turned it around, showing off its dents and scratches. Each mark tells a story. Jin ran his fingers over the smooth metal parts. As second engineer of the Sejong, he knew good machinery when he saw it. This wasn't just a coffee machine. It was a piece of engineering history, the kind of machine that required skill and patience to use, not just the push of a button. "Does it come with instructions?" Jin asked, already reaching for his credit chip. The shop owner laughed. "Son, this beauty needs no manual. Just water, coffee beans, and a bit of love. Though I'll throw in these old paper filters for free." 20 minutes later, Jin walked through the busy streets of Luna City with his precious purchase tucked safely in his arms. Other shoppers gave him odd looks. Most people these days carried sleek, modern devices, not ancient copper machines that looked like they belonged in a museum. Back on the Sejong, Jin sneaked the coffee machine into the engineering deck's break room. Captain Sunmai would probably not be happy about an unauthorized antique on her ship, but Jin knew his fellow engineers would cover for him. They were all tired of the tasteless coffee from the food synthesizers. "What in space is that?" asked Ji-min, one of the junior engineers, watching Jin set up the machine. "This," Jin said proudly, "is how humans made coffee 2 centuries ago." He pulled out a bag of real coffee beans he bought along with the machine. The rich smell filled the room as he opened it. Ji-min leaned closer, curious. "It looks complicated." "That's because it is." Jin grinned as he measured the beans into the grinder. "Modern machines do everything automatically. This one needs skill. You have to know the right amount of coffee, the correct water temperature, how fine to grind the beans." The next hour turned into an impromptu coffee-making lesson. More engineers drifted into the break room, drawn by the unusual sounds and smells. They watched in fascination as Jin heated the water, ground the beans, and carefully poured the hot water over the grounds in a slow circular motion. When the first batch was ready, Jin poured small cups for everyone present. The rich aroma of real, properly brewed coffee filled the room. The engineers fell silent as they took their first sips. "This," Ji-min's eyes widened. "This is nothing like synthesizer coffee." Jin smiled proudly. The reaction was exactly what he'd hoped for. One by one, the other engineers agreed. This was how coffee was supposed to taste. Before long, they were all arguing over who would get to learn the machine next. That evening, as Jin cleaned and polished his new treasure, he felt satisfied. The coffee machine might have cost him a month's pay, but seeing his colleagues' faces when they tasted real coffee made it worth every credit. He had no way of knowing that this simple purchase would soon catch the attention of humanity's first alien visitors, or that his beloved coffee machine would nearly cause an interstellar diplomatic crisis. For now, Jin was just happy to have brought a small piece of Earth's history to the engineering deck of the Sejong. As he made one final cup for his night shift, the old machine gurgled and hissed contentedly, its brass and copper parts gleaming under the break room lights. The rich smell of fresh coffee drifted through the engineering deck, marking the beginning of what would become a very strange chapter in human-alien relations. Captain Sunmai Park paced the bridge of the KSS Sejong, reading the same message for the 10th time. Her ship had been chosen for humanity's first diplomatic meeting with the Vexari Empire. The aliens had specifically requested a tour of a typical human military vessel, and somehow, out of all the ships in the Korean Space Force, they picked the Sejong. "Captain," her first officer said, "the Vexari ship will dock in 3 hours." Sun Li nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. She had checked everything twice. The clean corridors, the perfectly pressed uniforms, the carefully planned tour route. Everything had to be perfect. These aliens were known for their strict rules and complicated social traditions. "Have you read their cultural guide?" she asked her crew during the final briefing. The Vexari are very sensitive to disorder. They see it as a sign of poor leadership. She looked at each crew member seriously. No surprises today. Down in engineering, He Jin was giving his beloved coffee machine an extra polish. The brass and copper surfaces shone like new. In the month since he bought it, the machine had become famous throughout the ship. Even some bridge officers now sneak down to engineering for a proper cup of coffee. "Should we hide it?" Ji Min asked, watching He Jin clean. "The aliens might think it's strange." He Jin shook his head. "It's part of our daily routine now," the captain said, to show them a typical day on a human ship, right? Before Ji Min could answer, the ship's speakers crackled. "Attention all crew. Vexari diplomatic vessel approaching. All hands to welcome stations." The entire crew gathered in the main docking bay. They stood in perfect lines, uniforms spotless, backs straight. Sun Mai waited at the front, Ambassador Do Hyun Lee beside her. The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss. The Vexari were tall, elegant beings with shimmering scales and multiple pairs of eyes. They moved with careful, measured steps. Their leader, Grand Executor Valtek, towered over the human crew. Their environmental suits glowed with strange lights and occasionally made soft humming sounds. "Welcome aboard the KSS Stijong," Sun Mai said, bowing deeply. The ambassador had taught them all the proper Vexari greeting customs. Valtek's translator hummed. "We are honored to study your vessel," the alien leader replied. Their multiple eyes blinked in complex patterns. "We seek to understand how humans live and work in space." The tour began smoothly. The Vexari seemed impressed by the ship's organization and technology. They asked detailed questions about everything they saw, from the navigation systems to the crew quarters. Their multiple eyes recorded everything, and their environmental suits made soft clicking sounds as they walked. Then they reached engineering. The moment they entered, He Jin was in the middle of his afternoon coffee ritual. The old machine gurgled and hissed as it brewed, steam rising from its copper pipes. The rich smell of coffee filled the air. The Vexari delegation froze, all their eyes focused on the coffee machine. Their environmental suits began to pulse with rapid colors. What is that device?" Valtek asked. Their translator couldn't quite capture the mix of horror and fascination in their voice. Before Sun Mai could answer, He Jin smiled proudly. "Would you like to see how it works? I just started a fresh batch." The captain tried to catch his eye, to stop him, but it was too late. He Jin was already explaining the coffee-making process, completely missing the way the Vexari scales were changing color. "You deliberately heat the water to near boiling?" Valtek asked, "and then force it through crushed plant seeds?" "Yes," He Jin said cheerfully. "Here, watch this part." He started the final brewing stage, and the machine made its loudest noises yet. The Vexari delegation backed away. Their suits were now flashing urgent patterns of red and purple. Valtek's multiple eyes were all wide open, fixed on the coffee machine. Ambassador Lee, who had been quietly watching from the back, suddenly realized something was very wrong. But before he could step in, Valtek spoke again, their translator struggling to keep up with their rapid speech. We must discuss this with our High Council immediately." The Vexari left engineering so quickly they almost forgot their formal departure customs. As they hurried back to their ship, Sun Mai and Ambassador Lee exchanged worried looks. Somehow, a simple coffee machine had just turned their perfect first contact into a diplomatic puzzle. Ambassador Do Hyun Lee sat in the Sejong's conference room, watching the emergency transmission from the Vexari High Council. His head hurt. How could a simple coffee machine cause so much trouble? On the large screen, Three Vexeri council members shifted colors rapidly as they spoke. Their environmental suits pulsed with angry red lights. Behind them, a recording of He-Jin's coffee-making demonstration played on repeat. "This is clearly a violation of machine rights," one council member declared. Their translator made their voice sound shrill. The device screams in pain as the humans force scalding water through its systems. Do-hyun tried to stay calm. "I assure you, the coffee machine is not alive. It's simply a tool for preparing a traditional human beverage." A beverage. Another council member's scales turned a deep purple. "You mean humans drink the fluids extracted through this torture?" In engineering, Ho-Jin was still trying to understand what had happened. Captain Sunmai had ordered him to stop using the coffee machine until further notice. His fellow engineers sat around their break room table, drinking bland synthesizer coffee and looking miserable. "I don't get it," Ho-Jin said. "I was just trying to be friendly. How was I supposed to know they would think the machine was alive?" Jae-min patted his shoulder. "The Vexeri use sound waves for almost everything. They probably thought the machine's noises were sounds of pain." Back in the conference room, things were getting worse. The Vexeri had brought in their own engineers to analyze the recording. The aliens were especially upset about the grinding noise of the coffee beans. "You crush solid matter into dust before adding water." A Vexeri engineer's suit flashed patterns of distress. "The sound frequencies match our distress signals exactly." Do-hyun looked desperately at Captain Sunmai, who sat next to him. She hadn't said a word since the transmission began. Her face was perfectly calm, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table. "Perhaps," Sunmai said finally, "we should explain the history of coffee making." "History?" All the Vexeri's eyes turned to her. "You mean this barbaric practice has been happening for centuries?" The situation got even more complicated when the Vexeri demanded to examine the coffee machine. They sent two of their scientists to the Sejong, wearing special suits designed for handling dangerous devices. He-Jin watched in dismay as they scanned his beloved machine with all sorts of strange equipment. The Vexeri scientists jumped every time they touched the copper surface, as if expecting it to cry out in pain. "Please," one scientist said through their translator, "show us where this device keeps its central processing unit." "It doesn't have one," He-Jin explained. "It's completely mechanical. Look, I can show you how it works." "No," both scientists shouted at once, their suits flashing morning colors. "No more demonstrations." Word of the incident spread quickly through the ship. Some crew members found it funny, but others worried about what it meant for human-alien relations. In the crew mess hall, people started making jokes about coffee machine diplomacy. Ambassador Lee wasn't laughing. He spent hours trying to explain to the Vexari that coffee machines weren't sentient, that the noises were just part of the brewing process, and that coffee was an important part of human culture. Nothing seemed to work. "The High Council demands that all such devices be immediately deactivated," the lead council member announced. "We cannot stand by while primitive Earth machines are subjected to such treatment." Captain Sunmai finally lost her patience. "With all due respect," she said, standing up, "you cannot tell us to abandon thousands of years of cultural tradition because you misunderstand our technology." The Vexeri council members all changed color at once, creating a rippling rainbow effect. The conference room fell silent except for the soft hum of their environmental suits. Do-hyun closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He had studied for years to become an ambassador, but nothing had prepared him for this. Who would have thought that humanity's first diplomatic crisis with an alien species would be about coffee? Junior diplomat Jae-ho Kang never expected his first major assignment would involve explaining coffee to angry aliens. Yet here he was, standing before the Vexari High Council, with a detailed presentation about Earth's most popular drink. "As you can see," Jae-ho said, pointing to his holographic display, "humans have been making coffee for over 1,000 years. He showed pictures of ancient coffee makers, trying to keep his voice steady. The 7 Vexeri council members watched with all their eyes. their scales shifting between shades of blue and green. And all these devices, one council member interrupted, they all make these distressing sounds. The sounds are just part of the process, Jai-ho explained patiently. Like the humming of your environmental suits. Natural, normal, and not harmful. The council chambers were massive, with high ceilings that made Jai-ho feel very small. Behind him, Ambassador Do Hyun-lee watched nervously. They had spent all night preparing this presentation, hoping to prevent what the news stations were already calling the Great Coffee Crisis. Back on the Sejong, Ho-jin sat in his quarters, watching the live broadcast of the council meeting. His coffee machine, now officially labeled as Evidence Item 1 by the Vexari, sat in a sealed container in their science lab. He felt guilty about causing so much trouble, but also frustrated. How could anyone think his beautiful antique machine was being tortured? The device clearly shows signs of age and wear, a Vexari scientist declared, displaying detailed scans of the coffee machine. Look at these dents and scratches. Clear evidence of long-term abuse. Jai-ho tried not to sigh. Those marks show the machine's history. Humans value items that show their age. It proves they have served well and been well loved. This caused an uproar among the council. Their translators couldn't keep up with all their voices at once. Their suits flashed rapidly, changing patterns of light. Love, one council member finally said. You claim to love these machines while subjecting them to extreme temperatures and pressure. In another part of the Vexari station, Captain Sunmai was having her own problems. She was meeting with Vexari military leaders who were concerned about other Earth machines. They kept asking about blenders, washing machines, and particularly about something they called the dreaded vacuum cleaner. Captain Park, a Vexari commander, said, our research shows that humans have millions of these coffee machines. The scale of this situation is deeply troubling. Sunmai tried to remain diplomatic. Commander, I assure you that Earth's machines are not suffering. They are tools, not living beings. Tools. The commander's scales turned a deep red. Next you'll tell us that this is all for simple pleasure. Sunmai paused. Actually, that was exactly what she was going to say. Meanwhile, Jai-ho was running out of ways to explain coffee to the council. He had shown them the entire process, from growing coffee beans to roasting them. This had only made things worse. The council was now also concerned about the treatment of the beans. You mean to tell us, a council member said slowly, that humans intentionally grow these beans only to crush them into powder? Jai-ho looked desperately at Ambassador Lee, who stepped forward to help. Perhaps, the ambassador suggested, we could demonstrate the entire process, show you that nothing is being harmed. The council chamber erupted in flashing lights and color changes again. Absolutely not, the head council member declared. We will not be witness to such activities. In the back of the chamber, a young Vexari scientist was quietly taking notes. Unlike the others, their scales showed colors of curiosity rather than distress. They had noticed something interesting. Despite all the supposed torture, humans seemed to gather around these coffee machines. They appeared to be social focal points, places where humans bonded and shared experiences. The scientists raised one of their hands. Council members, if I may suggest, perhaps we are missing something important about human culture. The council turned all their eyes to the scientist, who suddenly wished they hadn't spoken. Jai-ho held his breath. Maybe, just maybe, this was the opening they needed to resolve this ridiculous situation. Chief Science Officer Yuna Baek stood in her lab on the Sejong, surrounded by coffee-making equipment from different time periods. She had spent 3 days preparing for this presentation. The Vexari had demanded a scientific explanation of coffee, and she was determined to give them one they could understand. Computer, begin recording, she said. This is presentation number 5. The Science and Culture of Coffee Making. She picked up a coffee bean and held it up to the camera. Behind her, screens showed detailed chemical analyses. The young Vexari scientist who had spoken up at the council meeting was watching via video link, their scales showing interested patterns of gold and silver. First, Yuna explained, these beans are seeds. Like many seeds, they contain stored energy and complex compounds. We don't harm them. We unlock their potential through a carefully controlled process. In another part of the ship, Hojin was finally allowed to clean his coffee machine. 2 Vexari guards watched his every move, their suits pulsing with nervous light patterns whenever the machine clinked or shifted. Look, Hojin said gently, let me show you something. He opened the machine carefully. See, simple mechanics. Gears, springs, heating elements. No pain receptors, no nervous system, no consciousness. One of the guards leaned closer, actually interested. Their suit's lights shifted to a calmer blue. Back in the lab, Yuna was making progress with her explanation. She had moved on to the chemistry of coffee brewing. The hot water acts as a solvent, she said, showing molecular diagrams. It extracts specific compounds that humans find pleasant and beneficial. The pressure and temperature are precisely controlled for optimal extraction. The Vexari scientist's translator hummed. But the sounds, they match our distress frequencies exactly. Yuna smiled. That's a fascinating coincidence. Actually, those sounds come from steam pressure and water flow. Here, let me show you with this clear glass coffee maker. She demonstrated with a simple setup that showed the entire process. The Vexari scientist watched intently as bubbles formed and water changed color. Remarkable, they said. And humans gather around this process. Yes, Yuna said excitedly. Coffee making brings people together. It's a social ritual that helps us connect with each other. Meanwhile, Ambassador Lee and Captain Sunmai were meeting with the Vexari High Council again. This time, they had brought data from Earth's medical databases. Coffee actually helps humans function better, Sunmai explained. It improves alertness, reaction time, and mood. Our bodies process it safely and efficiently. The council members seemed less agitated than before. Their scales showed thoughtful patterns of green and blue. The young scientist's questions had made them curious about human culture. And this ritual, one council member asked, it truly brings humans together. Absolutely, Lee answered. Coffee breaks are when we share stories, solve problems, and build friendships. The machine sounds that worried you. To us, they're comforting. They mean friendship and community are near. In the engineering break room, Hijin was proving this point. He had convinced his Vexari guards to stay and watch as he cleaned each part of the coffee machine. As he worked, other engineers dropped by, sharing stories about their favorite coffee moments. The guards' suits began showing new patterns, colors of interest and understanding. One of them even asked questions about how the different parts worked together. Back in her lab, Yuna was finishing her presentation with brain scans showing human reactions to coffee. See these patterns. She pointed to the bright areas. They show increased activity in areas related to pleasure, alertness, and social bonding. The entire coffee-making process, from the sounds to the smells to the taste, is deeply connected to positive human experiences. The Vexari scientists' scales had turned a bright, interested gold. This is remarkable, they said. What we thought was torture is actually a complex social and chemical process that benefits your species. Yuna nodded happily. Finally, someone understood. As she began packing up her equipment, her computer beeped with an incoming message. The Vexari High Council had reached a decision about the coffee machine incident. She held her breath as she opened the message. The future of human-Vexari relations might depend on how well her scientific explanation had worked. Commander Min Ho-song was having a very strange day. He stood in the Sejong's observation deck, watching the Vexari ships gather around the station. 6 more had arrived in the last hour. Each one carried members of different Vexari cultural groups, all wanting to study the coffee machine incident. This is getting out of hand, he said to Captain Sunmai. who stood beside him. You think? Sun Mai rubbed her temples. The Vexeri news networks are calling it the Great Machine Rights Crisis of 2457. Suddenly, Minho noticed something odd about the Vexeri ships. Every 4 hours, like clockwork, their crews would gather in specific rooms. Through the large observation windows, he could see strange lights pulsing in those rooms. "Captain," he said slowly, "have you noticed this pattern?" Sun Mai looked where he was pointing. "Yes, they do that every few hours. Some kind of maintenance routine for their environmental suits, I think." Minho wasn't so sure. He had been studying Vexeri behavior for weeks now. Something about those gatherings seemed familiar. Down in engineering, Hujin was still giving tours of his coffee machine to endless groups of Vexari scientists. He had explained the same process at least 20 times today. "And this part here," he said tiredly, pointing to the water tank, "is just for holding water. Nothing more." One of the Vexari scientists raised several appendages at once. "But why must it be so precise?" "Our scans show the water temperature is exactly 96.1 degrees. Because that's what makes the best coffee," Heijin explained. "Every detail matters in the ritual." The word ritual made all the Vexeri's scales flash bright pink. They huddled together, discussing something in their own language. Meanwhile, Commander Minho had convinced Captain Sun Mai to let him investigate the Vexeri gathering rooms. He was now watching security footage from their ships, which they had shared as part of the diplomatic exchange. "Look at this," he said excitedly. "Every 4 hours, they gather in these rooms. They arrange their suits in specific positions. They pour something into their environmental suits through special filters." Sun Mai's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" "Yes." Minho pointed to more footage. "They're not doing maintenance. They're having their own version of a coffee break." The discovery sparked intense activity on the Sejong. Ambassador Li was called immediately. They rewatched the footage together, noting every detail. The Vexeri had their own ritual drink. They added special mineral solutions to their environmental suits through complex filtering devices. The process took exactly 12 minutes each time. They even arranged themselves in specific patterns while they did it. "We've been so focused on explaining our ritual," Minho said, "we completely missed theirs." In the council chamber, tensions were still high. Another group of Vexeri engineers was presenting evidence about the dangerous nature of coffee machines. Just as they reached their conclusion, Minho burst into the chamber. Several council members changed color in surprise. "Honorable Council," he said, slightly out of breath, "before you continue, I wish to ask about your mineral enrichment ritual." The chamber went completely silent. Every Vexeri scales turned pale yellow, their color of surprise. "How do you know about that?" the head council member asked. Minho smiled. "Because we have been watching you perform it every 4 hours. The careful preparation, the specific temperatures, the gathered groups. It's not so different from our coffee ritual, is it?" The council members looked at each other, their scales shifting through various colors of realization. "You mean," one council member said slowly, "your coffee ritual is like our mineral enrichment ceremony?" "Yes." Minho displayed the footage he had gathered. "Look, we both have special devices for preparing drinks. We both gather in groups to enjoy them. We both follow careful procedures to get the best results." The young Vexeri scientist, who had first shown interest in coffee, stood up excitedly. "This explains everything. The humans aren't torturing their machines. They're performing their own version of our enrichment ritual." As understanding spread through the chamber, the colors of the council members' scales began to shift from angry reds to thoughtful blues and purples. Maybe, just maybe, humans and Vexari weren't so different after all. Hejin couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Vexeri had brought their mineral enrichment equipment to the Sejong's engineering break room. Strange devices with glowing tubes and humming filters sat next to his old coffee machine. Today, Ambassador Li announced to the gathered humans and Vexari, We will have our first official cultural exchange of drinking rituals. The young Vexari scientist who had helped bridge the understanding gap stood next to Hujin. Their name was Rintel, and they were just as excited about sharing their ritual as Hujin was about coffee. You see, Rintel explained, adjusting their equipment, we filter special mineral solutions through these crystals. The vibrations must be perfect, or the enrichment fails. Hajin nodded enthusiastically, just like how we need the right water temperature for coffee. Too hot or too cold, and it doesn't taste right. The break room was crowded. Captain Sunmai and several council members watched as both species prepared their drinks. The humans were fascinated by how the Vexari suits changed colors during their mineral enrichment process. The color patterns, Rintel said, show how much we enjoy the experience, like how humans smile and laugh during coffee breaks. Hajin started his coffee machine, and this time, the Vexari didn't flinch at the sounds. Instead, they watched with interest, their scales showing colors of curiosity and excitement. The sound frequencies, one council member noted, they're actually very similar to our enrichment harmonics. We mistook their meaning entirely. Jai Ho Kang, who had spent days trying to explain coffee to the council, smiled with relief. Both our species developed rituals around drinking together, he said. We just express it differently. The coffee machine gurgled and hissed, while the Vexari equipment hummed and pulsed. The mixed sounds created in strange but pleasant harmony. Humans and Vexari gathered around both machines, sharing stories about their drinking traditions. In our culture, a Vexari elder explained, the first sharing of enrichment solutions marks the beginning of friendship between groups. Commander Minho, who had discovered the connection between the rituals, grinned. On Earth, we say, let's get coffee when we want to start a friendship or business relationship. The atmosphere in the break room grew warm and friendly. The Vexari suits displayed peaceful patterns of blue and gold, while the humans smiled and laughed. Both species were discovering how much they had in common. Watch this part, Heijin said proudly, beginning the final stage of brewing. The coffee drips through the filter, taking exactly 4 minutes. Exactly like our final crystal phase. Rintel exclaimed, their scales shimmering with excitement. We also require 4 minutes for perfect enrichment. Ambassador Li looked at Captain Sunmei, both sharing a relieved smile. What had started as a diplomatic crisis was turning into a breakthrough in human Vexari relations. The head council member approached Heijin's coffee machine, their scales now showing calm, friendly colors. We owe you an apology, they said. We misunderstood your ritual entirely. Instead of torture, this machine helps create bonds between people. Heijin patted his coffee machine gently. No offense taken. Would you like to try some coffee? We found a way to adapt it for your environmental suits. The council members' scales flickered with interest. And would you humans like to try our mineral enrichment? We've adjusted the formula to be safe for your biology. Soon, humans were carefully sipping modified mineral solutions through special straws, while Vexari absorbed adapted coffee through their suit filters. The break room buzzed with conversation and laughter. You know, Sunmai said to Ambassador Li, this might be the first time in history that a war was prevented by a coffee machine. And some careful observation, Li added, nodding toward Commander Minho, who was eagerly learning about Vexari enrichment crystals. The old coffee machine sat proudly next to the Vexari equipment, its brass and copper surfaces gleaming. What had almost caused a diplomatic disaster had instead created a bridge between two very different species. As Hujin watched humans and Vexari sharing drinks and stories, he couldn't help but smile. His impulsive purchase at that Luna City market had done more for interstellar relations than 100 diplomatic meetings. 3 months after the Great Coffee Crisis, Heijin's old coffee machine sat in a special display case on the Sejong's engineering deck. Next to it stood a Vexari mineral enrichment unit, their tubes glowing with soft blue light. A small sign between them read, "The first bridge between cultures." I still can't believe they gave us one of their enrichment units, Jae-min said, watching a group of visitors admire the display. These are usually kept secret from other species. He-jin nodded proudly. And now every Korean Space Force ship has one, right next to their coffee maker. The Interstellar Beverage and Cultural Exchange Program, or IBCEP as everyone called it, had become the most successful diplomatic initiative in human history. Ships from Earth now carry both coffee machines and mineral enrichment units as standard equipment. In the Sejong's new Cultural Exchange Lounge, Captain Sunmai sat with Rintel, who had become the first Vexari exchange officer on a human ship. They were sharing their morning drinks, coffee for Sunmai, mineral enrichment solution for Rin-telephone. The Council's latest report is very positive. Rintel said, their scales showing happy patterns of gold and silver. Trade between our species has increased by 300% since we started the exchange program. Sunmai smiled. Who would have thought that drinking together could do what years of formal diplomacy couldn't? Across the galaxy, other alien species had heard about the coffee incident. Many were now requesting their own cultural exchange programs with humans. The Sejong had become famous as the ship where it all started. In his quarters, Commander Minho was writing the final chapter of his book, Drinking Together: How Beverages Shape Intergalactic Diplomacy. His discovery of the parallel between coffee breaks and mineral enrichment had earned him a promotion to Chief of Cultural Relations. The key, he wrote, was realizing that every species has its own way of coming together over drinks. What looks strange to one culture might be deeply meaningful to another. Down in engineering, He-jin was teaching a group of new crew members how to use both the coffee machine and the mineral enrichment unit. The Vexari had insisted that he receive special training in their enrichment rituals. Remember, he told the group, it's not just about the drinks. It's about the time we spend together while making them. Ambassador Lee had also received recognition for his role in resolving the crisis. He now led the newly formed Department of Interspecies Cultural Understanding. His office on Earth had both a coffee maker and an enrichment unit, which he used to welcome diplomats from all species. In the Vexari Empire, things had changed too. Their ships now had special human rooms where they could safely remove their environmental suits and try real coffee. The sound of coffee machines, once thought to be torture, had become a symbol of friendship. Even the old shopkeeper in Luna City who had sold He-jin the coffee machine had become a minor celebrity. His shop now specialized in antique drink-making devices from various cultures. A sign in his window read, "Home of the famous peacemaking coffee machine." As He-jin finished his shift that day, he made 2 drinks, a coffee for himself and a mineral solution for his Vexari engineering partner. They sat together in the break room, just like humans and Vexari did now on thousands of ships across space. You know what's funny? He-jin said, sipping his coffee. When I bought that old machine, I just wanted a better cup of coffee. I never thought it would change history. His Vexari friend's scales sparkled with amusement. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest differences. Like how a misunderstanding about a simple machine led to the greatest friendship between our species. Above them, the old coffee machine and the enrichment unit sat together in their display case, symbols of how 2 very different species had learned to understand each other. Every now and then, for special occasions, He-jin was still allowed to use his old machine. And if you listened carefully during those moments, you could hear the happy hiss of steam and the gentle hum of enrichment crystals, making music together in perfect harmony.